Howdy folks. You've just resurrected a classic franchise that has this really cool Arabian Nights theme that shows itself to be in love with colour and with some of the silliness that's generally involved with video games. What are you going to do next? If your answer was that you'd add a metal soundtrack, turn the whole thing grimdark, make the lead antagonist sound like the crow swallowed a cheese grater, put in some horrific sexualization and make the whole thing entirely too long, you might have worked on Warrior Within. If not, well, me either, but here we are. So, first thing worthy of note, the series is keeping me guessing with the gamepad shenanigans. First off, we had full gamepad support with no default controls whatsoever. This time around we had full gamepad support with controls all in the wrong places. This must have been deliberate. There's some mechanical UI developer somewhere laughing at me, I'm sure of it. I'm kinda interested to see what the third one does randomly with the gamepad at this point, honestly. Once we get into the game proper though... Okay. I've been trying to decide how to talk about this, because I want these reviews to be fun, I want to be fun, but I do need to say something here, and I'm fully aware this might be the point a bunch of folks stop watching this video, because I'm about to get on my soapbox, but honestly, I don't care. We live in a society where violence against women is nothing short of an epidemic, and while, no, video games are not the cause of that, there are times they certainly don't help. This is Shadi. If you don't know her by name from when you played Warrior Within, then don't worry about it, because the game possesses no interest in you doing so, and in fact her name isn't even mentioned till after she's dead. She exists to be a boss fight, nothing more, nothing less, and that would be okay on its own, except the game does nothing but sexualize her the entire time she's on screen. Did you know this game has one cutscene you can't skip? It's this one, the slow motion shot of her ass, pretty much bare. And it's right before you beat the tar out of her for the first time. This character exists for you to sexualize and then beat to death. She has literally no other purpose in this game, and crap like this is part of the problem when it comes to a culture of violence against women. This is a really embarrassing part of gaming history. It was long beyond the point of being outdated, even when this game came out, and honestly it offends me. Let's get on to the review. I don't want to dwell on this anymore. The graphics. Okay, if you're still with me, thanks for bearing with me through that. So I had a bit of a difficult time deciding how to rate the graphics for Warrior Within. In terms of detail, they're improved from the first one in pretty much every way I would expect, so kudos for that. Where I struggle is if I should mark them down for all the brown, grimdark nonsense that's going on around them. I mean, sure, honestly they all look like a bar of chocolate that's been left in a hot car for an hour, but it feels unreasonable to mark down the graphics for being in keeping with the game's theme, so yep, I think it's reasonable that they look the way they do, even though I don't care for them personally. We've honestly got a pretty cool damage effect going on with the enemies now as well. They start to come apart and sort of show off the sand they're made from when they're close to death, and we now have these grab and execution type moves. It's fun to watch them fall apart. They do sometimes let out spurts of blood though, and Ubisoft, were these guys supposed to be flesh and blood soldiers, and then like, you panicked at the last second and said that everyone was made of sand to appease the ESRB? I mean, our green dot leanings only go so far here it seems. Anyway. There are a couple of issues with the graphics. For one, the prince looks noticeably better than the Empress of Time, who is about the closest we come to an actual NPC in the game. Also, and this is not specific to Warrior Within, but when we get these realistic looking characters in games, I always find it very, very noticeable when one of them has a lazy eye, which the Empress does. I've got one myself, and I'm never sure if I should feel represented or mark them down for slightly dodgy character design. Oh well. Last thing on the graphics, it has its detriments, which we'll talk about later in the review, but the ability to see pretty much every area in both the past when it was pristine, and in the future when it was crumbling to dust and half the traps broken and stuff, is really, really cool. It would have been cool to see that done in real time in a similar vein to, say, Soul Reaver, and that's a game we're going to get to someday, but it is a nice feature. Moving on. Environment and story. And now that I gave the graphics a free pass, here's where I get to really cut loose on some of those god-awful and baffling design choices. Huzzah! You know what's sad? This puppy. You know what's sad but relevant to Warrior Within? I think there is potential for a really, really great story here. The concept of the Dahaka, this creature from beyond time itself, chasing down the prince because he cheated death so many times, that's brilliant. And it's personal to the player too. I was the prince in Sands of Time. I pressed rewind on that dagger and cheated death. The beef that the Dahaka has is with me as the player as well as the prince. I would even have taken the prince looking a bit of a mess because he's been running from this thing for so long. But what happened here? Why did we go from Arabian Nights to goth metal? You'd have serious difficulty convincing me this is the same prince as the one I played previously. And you just can't do that in a sequel. Was this even supposed to be the second Prince of Persia game? Or did we get cold feet about Project Market to 15-year-olds on Xbox Live and decided it needed a franchise name adding or something? In terms of the story, I do feel we've turned a couple of pages over at once. The prince was last seen talking to Farah, and indeed the device he's using to store sand looks by all accounts to be her amulet, but it's never explained how he acquired it. It just looks similar. And there were sometimes I don't get the prince's logic on where to go next. There were times I were given objectives like, go back to the throne room, and I wasn't really sure why I was doing so. It felt like back when I was a kid and I was watching this dude guide people around. Wow, my international viewers are going to be baffled on that one. Okay, anyway. On the note of going back to different locations, before replaying the game for this review, I remembered hating the backtracking in the game, and I started off playing and feeling that maybe my memory had been a little bit harsh. Like I said earlier, there's this 2 time zone thing which I really like, but then I ended up traversing the exact same parts in the same time zone of the game 3 or 4 times, and I forgive my past self everything. It's all very zen actually. I was at one point gonna call use of this particular enemy overdone, but then I realised I wasn't fighting different versions of him, I was fighting the exact same respawned enemy 3 or 4 times. And this wasn't taking some secret route or anything, this is the intended story route. Honestly, I think a big part of the problem is that the story is just too long. It goes around 15 hours, and honestly, based on where we were story-wise around the 10-hour point, I thought we were finishing things up, and then it just sort of kept going. We have one of the previous boss fights repeated, and then the game just sputters to a halt like the engine died 5 hours ago and we just sort of kept gliding. It's a bloody laboured metaphor, that one, but here we are. Sound. I have a confession to make. Actually, there are a few dozen different confessions I could be making, but I have one specific to Warrior Within. For all my complaining about the grimdark, this game actually has a pretty kick-ass soundtrack. Now, it's a soundtrack that doesn't have any business being in the same room, or for that matter even the same hotel as a Prince of Persia game, but it is still great. I'm just going to play a short clip here. Now, obviously if you don't like metal that won't mean anything, and if you already do like metal you'll know that was pretty good, rendering this comment about as much use as a metal track in a Prince of Persia game. On the flip side, now the characters talk! You see that flanging dial, Mr. Sound Engineer? It wasn't set to 0 when you came in. It was left on whatever setting they used for filming Transformers, and you've gone and cranked it to double. Leave it alone. It's not disguising the crappy voice acting, however much you think it might do. Oh, and I'm not going to harp on it again, but after everything I said earlier about violence against women, hearing this sound clip not long after defeating Sadi made me want to break something.
Don't you know not to strike a woman?
Let's just move on from that one, shall we? Yeah. Gameplay. You know what's a real shame, and I think I might now be on a 4 for 4 for starting sections with similar feelings, so yay, I can review. If you like the gameplay in Sands of Time, most of the stuff that was good is still here. We're doing the Indiana Jones-like thing again, though we do our section without the ability to rewind time up front this time, which is a better position for it, but I'd still rather it not exist at all. Once we do get the ability to reverse time back, the platforming is totally solid, except for a couple of puzzles which seem to hate people like myself with crappy depth perception. We've got some new sand powers as well, most of which I actually had a hell of a time getting to work, but that was my issues with the gamepad, it's not the game's fault that I didn't use them much. We have a new combat engine, as I mentioned previously, and I am all in favour of that. I know I said I didn't have any problem with the combat in Sands of Time, but it was a good area for improvement, given there's not really much you can do to the platforming. The Prince doesn't have his trusty dagger this time, so we've got this system where we basically rotate the weapon that's in our offhand. You can pick up one that's lying around or just steal them straight from enemies, and I actually really enjoy this. Though this room with 4 of the bouncing, backstabbing, can't flip over them enemies can, quite frankly, flog right off. Also, once you get the slow motion ability, you can basically trivialise any combat encounter you want to. It's also practically a requirement for the boss fights. I mentioned that the Dahaka was my favourite story element, and he's my favourite element of the gameplay too, quite frankly. The moment when he shows up in game, it's like this real Nemesis in Resident Evil 3 vibe, only in a game that's built far more about running away anyway. I've actually liked a few more of these segments, and it's weird that you never fight him as a boss. Speaking of bosses, there are 5, 2 of which are repeated fights, and they are terrible. There are 2 different ways of doing them. There's having sand and activating slow-mo, attacking till the boss blocks, rolling behind the boss, and repeating. And there's the version without sand, where you block the boss's combo and you hope that they don't add their unblockable attack to the end of it. You try and attack the boss, you get hit, you die, and you reload with sand tags. They're also absolute sponges, both of them, it's terrible. The boss fight I actually enjoyed was against this Manticore, I think? It also comes right out of nowhere and is never mentioned again. It's a great fight, but contextually to the plot, it feels like a fever dream. Random stuff. Okay folks, if you weren't around for the last video, this is where I stick stuff I asked myself while I was playing the game and I just had nowhere to put it in the review. Here we go. Why can I get hit before the cutscene finishes? How can the prince not know who this is at this point? Why do I have to do this 4-button puzzle close to a dozen times with a different combination every time? Who thought this exit was good game design? So, yeah, a lot of missteps for the series here. But I think what's interesting on a replay is that the actual core of the experience is still there and it's still great. It's just that they managed to get everything around that core gameplay loop entirely wrong. It's been a while since I played the third game, and I believe it does fix a lot of these problems. Although, hang on, does the third game open with the Empress travelling back to Babylon with the prince? A secret ending that changes the entire theme and outcome of the plot. Oh, you have got to be flogging me.